we are very lucky to have these first two presentations because they deal with facts, figures, and the factors that drive energy transition. Now, so the subject of energy transition is well known, so I may not, and then the issue of justice is also well known, as Felix has elaborated. So what I will do is to bring in the concept of triple helix for sustainable energy development in our. So basically, I will be doing more on the concept of triple helix and how we use it to develop our energy resources in Africa. You know, so for those of you who won't be familiar with triple helix, triple helix was developed by these two professors. Ideas change the world. And one globally recognized big idea that has changed the world is triple helix, developed by these two professors, Professor Ajienka and Professor Lewis, a Dutch professor, Luet. And incidentally, this big idea came from sociology. Sociology is more like the physics of studying the human nature and how that can be used to transform society. So through these gentlemen, the world received a big idea, which is called triple helix. Now, this big idea, triple helix, has given birth to a lot of new ideas. It has given birth to international associations, networks, knowledge assets. For those who may not be familiar, there's a Triple Helix Association, a global body. There is a University Industry Innovation Network, which is also based on this big idea. There's also Association of University Technology Managers in the United States, which is also related to this idea. And there are a couple of other developments, International Triple Helix Institute, the concept of entrepreneurial universities, business incubators, and all that, knowledge, technology transfer. As a matter of fact, triple helix can be used to plan the development of a state, of a country. It can also be used to assess the level of development of a country. Now, why triple helix? Triple helix is simply, or what is triple helix? It's simply the collaboration between business, government, and university. So it is something that was developed from the DNA, from medical science, where they apply the concept of DNA to bring government, university, and industry to work together instead of working in silos. And just to give you an idea why this is important, we know that strength grows through union. There's an African proverb that says you can break a broomstick, but you cannot break the broom. There's also a statement that says 3 good heads are better than 1. Of course, there must be good heads are better than 1. Concerts, we know that we have the different voice notes and so on to bring about harmony. There is something which many people are also not familiar with. It is developed by Gerard Porsche, which is based on the thinking types. We all have different thinking types. There are those who think like, who have ideas, and they are called ideators. There are those who criticize those ideas to polish them. There are those who develop the idea. There are those who implement the ideas. Our thinking types are different. And so if you want to form a good team, you must bring people together in a logical manner to achieve results. But today, people are also talking about you either collaborate or you collapse. Now, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17th Sustainable Development Goal, after they have defined the different goals The 17th one, partnership for the goals. In other words, all the 16 goals earlier on can only be achieved if we have the right partnership. And so today, partnership, collaboration, cooperation are the things that we sustain. However, let's go a little bit into the concept of triple helix and how it can be applied to the economies of the world. It was known that government, industry, university, when they work in silos, that is what is called the static model. When they work in silos, they cannot achieve good development. And that is what you see common in under economies. But when they are a bit connected, they achieve more. You find this in developing economies. And in developed economies, there is a balanced collaboration. Every part of this helix is properly locked in. Government is collaborating with industry. Industry is collaborating with university. University is collaborating with government. And everybody is working in a manner that is mutually beneficial. And so this is, you can see the economies of the world. The underdeveloped economies operate in silos. And this is what you find largely in Africa. And it is important for us to note this since we are talking about energy transition in Africa. And if we want to have the just transition, which Felix has talked, begin to apply the concept of triple helix, where we understand the strengths of government, industry, and university to work together to solve our own problems. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve the just transition that is being advocated in Africa. Now, what are the key roles of the partners in the triple helix? Government has the role of formulating policies and of sustainable development. The policies of government must be well formulated for development. And I'll talk a little bit about sustainable development. Universities, on the other hand, are allied communities. Universities are think tanks of society. They are set up for teaching, research, entrepreneurship, and community service. Universities conduct research to discover new knowledge. The word discover is very important. You discover what exists, you didn't know about it. So universities discover new knowledge, teach students to imbibe this new knowledge, and become better citizens, become leaders in future. And all this, when you translate everything together, adds to what is called community service, a mission of university. On the other hand, industry is set up for practice, for productivity and profitability. Don't forget, industry is set up for profitability. And of course, when they do this, they contribute to economic development. Governments have put sustainable development under government, economic development under industry. But university is the bridge to, in the formulating policies, in the discovery of new knowledge, in the discovery of new technologies for energy transition and energy exploitation. And so collaboration is the basis of triple helix. Now, for energy management to take place, Africa must use best available resources, human and material resources. And material resources, of course, will also include finance. Felix had already told us that the global financing of the oil and gas industry will dwindle because they've come up with policies and the rest. And so as long as the African countries are not in a position to fund the oil and gas industries, many of them, Nigeria, for instance, is sinking in debt. Like Felix made an important statement. the fear of being recognized through climate change, energy transition, and countries sinking in debt is very important. So I'll put finance in red. It is important that African countries pay attention to this, because the global governments of the developed countries are saying they will not be funding fossil fuel exploration and exploitation and all that. Although the war in Ukraine is changing the dynamics a little bit, but nobody knows how the future will develop. Felix had already said Europe is now going back to coal and looking to Africa for gas supply and so on. But all that will force them to invest heavily in alternative energy resources. Now, for energy transition management, we need to use best available technologies, best software applications, best operating policies, best operating practices. And this is where the university best available technologies, best practices and policies through research. And unfortunately, our universities are properly funded, are not ranking well globally when it comes to research and so on. And so there is a tragedy here. For the universities to play roles they are expected to play to support African energy transition, they need to be properly funded. Unfortunately, our governments pay lip service to funding of higher education. And in Nigeria, for instance, if you look at the influx of Nigerians to foreign schools, of flight, this is something that can be used to develop education in the country to support higher education. And through research, universities engage in what they are established to globally recognized research, locally relevant research, in this case of energy transition, to support energy security in Africa, then of course we'll begin to see good results. Research will also be collaborative and strategically sustainable in such a way that we knowledge, in this case for energy and climate change and so on, because we shouldn't be left behind. Like Felix, climate change is a major issue. Everybody is seeing it. The impacts are obvious. And so we should not be left behind in engaging in research in climate change, in engaging in research in energy transition in such a way that we too are active players in this research, and also transform research. Of course, this man said research is the transformation of money into knowledge. If you don't have the money, how can you even engage in reasonable research? And innovation is a transformation of knowledge into money. And I've also said value. In this case, value of energy, just energy transition and sustainable development. So, so the universities are very clear. The mission of a university is very clear: teaching, research and development, entrepreneurship, and then community service. And through that, we will contribute to the sustainable development goals. And in this case, for energy security. Now look at Africa. Just look at the map I'm showing you on the screen. Africa is, this is map of the world at night. Africa is completely dark. Those areas you see light radiating are the areas where you see the best universities. You see the Nobel Prize winners. You see the policy institutes. Policy institutes are responsible for some of these policies we are discussing, of energy transition, of digital transformation, of climate change. How many climate change institutes are in Africa? How many energy transition institutes are in Africa? And yet, Africa suffers from lack of energy security and sustainability. Africa suffers from like Felix said, global warming, and yet we are not the major pollutants in the world, but we are going to be impacted even much more. So my suggestion is that we need to adapt policies such as triple helix to make a difference. But more importantly, we must be indigenous. We must be indigenous, very important. We must make use of our resources in a manner that will contribute to sustainable development. We don't need to buy every tidbit they throw into the market, hook, line, and sinker. Now there's energy transition. We are struggling to say, let this energy transition be just transition. We must be indigenous. We must be active players in our universities through research and development, investigate into climate change, and come up with solutions to mitigate the impacts. We must also investigate into different sources of energy in such a way that we too are active players. Otherwise, we stand a great risk. Now, many years ago, since 2003, even before the Sustainable Development Goals, a Nobel Prize winner, Richard Smalley, has said the greatest challenges in the next few years, he listed them, 10 of them. Energy is number one. Energy is number one. Water, food, environment, poverty, terrorism and war, disease, education, number 8, democracy, population. These problems are more in Africa. Our population is exploding. Felix had already said, I was afraid when he said we will overtake China in our population growth in Nigeria. So where do you, and meanwhile you have terrorism, war, and all kinds of things. Education is not well funded. How can education play the role it is expected to play? And energy is number one. We don't have energy security, and in the absence of energy security, how can you even develop your infrastructure? And all these are connected. Even before the Sustainable Development Goals came into the scene, all these were connected. Now just look at map of Africa. You can see from 1975 to 2015, Africa is being painted red. In other words, we have the oil and gas resources. In the face of energy transition, we're not going to abandon these resources and run with the crowd. We need to develop these resources and use these resources to invest in infrastructure and development. Unfortunately, we don't even have the funding to exploit, to explore and exploit these resources. And that is a dilemma we face. You know? So the good news is that today, the Triple Helix Society is registered. There's a Nigerian chapter of it. We must continue to advocate Triple Helix in such a way that we use it as a model for development, as a model for evaluating, and so on. So there are all kinds of evolution of the Triple Helix concept. I don't want to go into that. So today, in the University of Port Harcourt, we talk about Triple Helix Plus. It is not just about collaboration between government, university, and industry, but collaboration with professional bodies, collaboration with industry schools, collaboration with academies, like Professor Sambo said, he just gave a lecture to Academy of Science, Academy of Engineering, and so on. We need to all collaborate to solve the problems of our society and indeed Africa. Now, the purpose of education, in which the university has a major role to play, is to impact knowledge, enable students to acquire skills, to develop the right attitude, and of course, furthering values. We need a new mindset, a new data set, big data, data-driven research. You know, data-driven policy research is a key to the transformation of Africa. We need new skill sets. We need new tools, to succeed. And so we need to look at our educational system. We need to restructure properly so that our higher education institutions will perform the roles they're expected to perform. We're in the age of sustainable development. There's a book called The Age of Sustainable Development, written by Jeffrey Sachs, who is a global authority in the aspect of sustainable development. We are in the fourth industrial revolution, and this is why people are talking about energy 4.0. We also are talking about education 4.0. Our education should be tailored to solving the problems of society. Higher education should adopt education 4.0, include energy transition, digital transformation. Everybody is going green. And so the energy for sustainable development, we must be active players in the development of this energy. Otherwise, we'll be left behind. So in this new age, the new age is characterized by connection, cooperation, collaboration, and community. We need to work together to ensure that we are active players in this. The two earlier presenters have already said energy transition is real. It is fueled by climate change. If we are left behind by not funding higher education the way we are supposed to fund, if our higher education system in Africa is not well positioned to engage in policy-driven research, to engage in different mindsets, then of course we stand a great risk, a very great and grave risk. So I don't need to belabor the point, but let me also say something about development. The word development, everybody talks about sustainable development. The word development in itself, I want to graphically present it to you like de-envelopment. De-envelopment means everybody must unfold his abilities and talents. Africans must begin to realize, we must begin to realize our talents and abilities. Sometimes it is so shameful that we look like people who do not know what to do. We must unfold our abilities, our talents, and this can only be done through education. We must be very indigenous. We must be on ground. This is why we are born in Africa. We must adapt ourselves to our soil, to our environment, to our race, and be proud of where we are and engage in research, in policy research, in research that can transform Africa. Otherwise, we stand a grave danger. And so the concept of triple helix helps us to work together with government agencies, with industry, in such a way that we play the role we are expected to play. Energy transition is real, but what we're advocating is just transition. And this just transition must be based on we, ourselves in Africa, being indigenous, knowing the resources we're endowed with, exploiting them ourselves for the benefit of Africa. Otherwise, they come up with one big word, transition, and before you know it, look at the war in Russia. They started coming back to Africa for us to export gas to them and all that. Meanwhile, the coal they have, they've also started going back to it. And so, I don't want to talk about the energy industry. Felix has talked about it. Hydrogen and fossil fuel, solid, in form of coal, oil and gas, we have it in Africa. All we need to do is to ensure that government plays its role properly in terms of policy formulation and play the right politics of development. Universities should play their right role in terms of teaching, research, and develop new knowledge, discover new knowledge for development of Africa. And industry itself, working together, supporting research, and all that must play its role in the development of Africa. So let me just conclude like Felix, I talked about energy transition, and so I used to talk about energy addition, and I'm sure he has talked about this. So change is taking place. For instance, change is taking place in the industry. Many of the oil companies started changing their names. Total, E&P changed to Total Energy. Seplat in Nigeria changed to Seplat Energy. And even companies that did not fully change their names have set up energy units, energy subsidiaries. As industry is changing, education is also changing. And so many universities, starting from Stanford, changed their program to energy resources engineering. And petroleum is just a subset. So they are exploring all the various sources of energy. And this is what we're expected to do in Africa. We need to explore all the sources of energy. And like Sambo said, petroleum is still very useful, not only for transportation and so on. Petroleum is very useful in all kinds of products. So we too must be actively involved in research into energy transition and climate change. Global investment in fossil fuel in oil and gas companies severely limited and controlled. Felix has already talked about they are using policies such as ESG to control funding of oil and gas companies. And so we must begin to play the right, government must play the right politics, develop the right policies to fund indigenous development. Okay, so like I said, our universities must get involved in the energy mix properly and become a support to energy transition in Africa. So let's begin to conclude. Application of triple helix is vital because collaboration, partnership is key to sustainable development. And the university is at the core of this development. We need to engage in policy relevant research, engage in research that develops new technology, and all that for focusing on energy transition, climate change, to support the energy transition in Africa. But more importantly, we must explore all sources of energy for sustainable growth through proper application of triple helix. We must be indigenous so that we can realize the just transition we are advocating. Climate change and policy research, these are very necessary. We must be actively involved to secure our respectability in the world. On this note, I would like to say that triple helix as a concept, a development concept, very important in achieving the just transition we're advocating. Thank you very much.